Well, thank you very much, everybody. And Eugene did an excellent job of introducing the topic of today, as did the presenters early in the morning, which all you have to do is spend a few minutes being exposed to the technological progress of the attacker to start to get that feeling of discontent with the way of the world, and a feeling of impending doom, as much of the talk about cyber attacks and cyber warfare in particular tends to instill in us. We don't have to say much more about the change that's occurring in the world, other than to point out the fact that there are conferences being held on cyber warfare and cybersecurity around the world today, this being the one that's in the nicest location. I'm going to introduce our panelists. We all know Eugene Kaspersky. Thank you very much for hosting this conference in the first place. Immediately to my right is Mick Moran. Mick is the acting assistant director of cybersecurity and crime for Interpol, which is, of course, the International Criminal Police Organization. To his right, Alex Ntoko is the head of the ITU's Corporate Strategy Division. And Alexander Seger has been with the Council of Europe from 1999 on. And since this past October, he is the secretary of the Cybercrime Convention Committee and head of the Data Protection and Cybercrime Division. So let's kick off, and we've got three main themes, and the very first theme is around the idea of defining and what is cyber war and some of the implications of it. Let's start on the far right with Alexander and give us your thoughts on defining cyber war in the first place.
Thank you. That now I know why you seated me over here. I think I fully agree with one of the presenters this morning that there was the war had too large capitals, was too large compared to the cybercrime letters. I think we can all agree that there is a proliferation of attacks by many, against many, and for many purposes. I think this is clear. We also see that there's a risk of escalation because ICT is so important for national security, is so much in national interest. And with this proliferation attack, with a very low threshold of attack, such situations can easily escalate if indeed we do not find a way to cooperate with each other with trust and confidence. However, I have great difficulties with the concept, understanding the concept of cyber war. As you mentioned, I worked some time ago, 20 years ago in Pakistan, and I was responsible at some point for working out a cross-border telecom network between Pakistan and Iran, between the Revolutionary Guard on the one side and the Frontier Corps Balochistan, the paramilitary forces on the Pakistani side. The reason for that is that there was a lot of drugs traffic from Helmand province, which since at that time nobody knew what it was. Now everybody knows what is Helmand province in Afghanistan. There was a lot of drugs coming from Helmand through Pakistan into Iran with very violent consequences on all sides. And one of the things the Mujahideen-backed drug traffickers did, they jammed the communication system of the Pasdaran, the Revolutionary Guards, which meant they could not coordinate their law enforcement action, and the drug traffickers could find a way through to the deserts of Iran and then onwards to Turkey and Europe. Now, from what we discussed this morning, that was a cyber war. So the cyber war in that sense didn't start in 2007 with Estonia. It started maybe already at that time and in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. And you can also ask the question, cyber war, was there a government of Afghanistan involved? Well, there was not really a government of Afghanistan, but it was a local government in a way. So, but it also points at definitional problems that we have. It's too easy to call something cyber war. I guess we would need to talk about cyber war at least of states involved, action by states, maybe against states. But we know attribution is difficult. Is hacktivism cyber war, as was presented this morning? Very difficult. We have also something else which was not so much mentioned this morning. We have something that on the long way from Frankfurt to Cancun, I thought about it, and I would call DOR attacks. Not DOS, but DOR attacks, which are denial of right attacks, where somebody mentioned the example of Belarus this morning, where government or government agencies may attack websites of media, civil society, or opposition, where they may intercept communication, where they may intrude in the computer systems, destroy data of media, journalists, of civil society, etc. So we also have to keep in mind that we not only talk about states being attacked, but also states attacking civil society and political opposition. I guess if we start with the cyber terrorism or cyber warfare definitions, we may be misled because of what I just tried to explain. I think what we can agree upon is that we are worried about attacks, cyber attacks, attacks against systems and attacks by means of computer data and systems. So I think we should focus on that first as the starting point. And there the underlying conduct is the same for everything. You talk about data interference, system interference, illegal access, illegal interception, etc. It's the basic underlying conduct is the same. It's the underlying conduct of what we can also call cybercrime. The second thing, we then have to ask who did it. The sort of things that Moran is spending his nights worrying about. Who did it? Whether we have states or terrorists or criminals or criminal organizations or individuals or hacktivists. And based on that, we can then think about the response. Once we get there, we can think about the response. Obviously, and many governments have done it, and as I said, the world should be grateful to Estonia for having been attacked in 2007. States woke up and developed cybersecurity strategies. So that's one part of the response, where you protect yourselves against intentional attacks by states and criminals and everybody else, but also where you take measures against non-intentional incidents as part of cybersecurity strategies. Another, depending on who did it, part of the response is the criminal law response. As I said, the underlying conduct is the conduct of cybercrime. With the criminal law response, you can go a very, very long way. And finally, if you don't get somewhere, because you may not be able to send some police officers to arrest states, if states are behind this, you may have to think indeed in another direction, whether that eventually would lead to a treaty. One has to see, or maybe Alex Ntoko can respond to that. But I think the discussions, you mentioned London, Eugene, the London conference, and discussions at the level of the OSCE. There is a discussion, there seems to be a consensus to work towards principles of state behavior as a starting point. Because you have to start somewhere. You cannot just go there and say, here's a treaty, 200 countries all ratify right now. It's a long process, but such principles on state behavior or codes of conduct or norms of behavior for states, that could be a starting point to cover those areas where we talk about action by states.
Very good, thank you. So Alex Ntoko, what's your perspective on the whole cyber war front?
Yeah, I think I'll start by saying that when we look at what we talk about today, we say cyber warfare, let's go back to see what has been the impact and the use of communications in traditional warfare. We have always had military. Military, whenever a war is supposed to start, one of the first things that happens is that they put down the telecommunication towers so that there's no communication. And we should understand that today, it is not just because we are in this room and we want to say something which is maybe popular and use language that people like, but there are military people who are sitting and discussing, and some of them are getting billions of dollars to develop cyber warfare capability. That is the reality. I have had the opportunity to be in close meetings in Europe, in NATO. They were all military officials. And it was all about cyber capabilities. So we have to take this reality into account, the fact that some military outfits are incorporating cyber technologies as they have incorporated chemical, biological, and nuclear technologies in their military strategies. It is the same thing which is happening. And you all are aware of the fact that not too long ago, there was a 4-star general appointed in the US who is, has a bunch of troops, and they are developing and they are working on capabilities which will enable them, maybe successfully or unsuccessfully, to defend themselves or to be also offensive. So I see cyber warfare as something which is a threat. It is something we need to look at. It's something we need to start considering how to address. In my view, it has not happened yet, but last year, January 2011, my Secretary General and the World Federation of Scientists, there's about 10,000 scientists from all over the world, from about 110 countries, they published something which they call a quest for cyber peace. And for those of you who are interested, we have this publication in all 6 ITU languages: English, French, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, and Chinese. So we can give you the full publication in electronic format if you are interested in it. But their scientists, a number of them Nobel Prize winners, they met in Erice in Italy, and they said, well, Mr. Secretary General, what is it that we can work on together? We have been working for years on permanent monitoring channel for nuclear, I've forgotten, they have a very long name which has to do with the monitoring of nuclear technology so that it doesn't go into the wrong hands. So some of these scientists are people who have got Nobel Prizes, and their work has been used in the development of nuclear weapons. So we did publish this book, A Quest for Cyber Peace. I have 2 copies here for those who would like to see what it is like. And again, the plea there was that let us try to talk about avoiding a cyber war before it actually occurs, because we should not always wait for something to happen before we try to stop it. We had the financial crisis. Some governments had been saying we need some basic regulations to be able to have the same understanding on how we do global finance. But this was not done, so the market crashed. A number of people lost money, many lost their jobs. We at ITU, we are saying that information and communication technologies are too vital. They are extremely important today for human, social, and economic development. We cannot let this industry collapse, because the impact would be more serious than the collapse of the financial industry. Imagine all the systems that have been connected to ICTs. You saw yesterday some of the damages, not yesterday, the week before, some of the damages that could occur just by people hacking into PLC systems or SCADA systems. So we are trying to say, for 140-something years now that we existed, we started from Telegraph Union, and we are now dealing with next generation networks. We believe that this industry is crucial. Cyberspace is crucial for social and economic development. We need to try to work on avoiding some of the threats which are emerging before they actually get to a point where they destroy the infrastructure. That's what I would say for now.
Very good, thank you. Mick, obviously there's a rush to arm, as the other panelists have pointed out, and there are meetings being held and dollars being devoted to cyber preparedness in the military side of things. How does that impact what you're doing?
Well, that's one of the bigger fears that we would have within the cybercrime world. Definitions, words are easy to throw, definitions are harder to come by, and you only have to ask even the UN or the Council of Europe how hard it is to get countries to agree on a definition of something, never mind on actual treaties, to sign up to actual treaties. So define cyber war. Is there anybody here can define cyber war for me? I suppose the closest thing we saw to cyber war or cyber warfare was the Estonian Russian incident in 2007 in terms of an attack on a country's infrastructure and telecommunications infrastructure. But yet, you'd have to say, was that an actual act of war by Russia and Estonia? I don't think you can define it like that. Mm-hmm. Now, I have certain difficulties talking about this subject matter. I'm just a simple policeman. I work for the International Criminal Police Organization, and talking about governments and war and all this sort of thing makes me very uncomfortable, I have to say. Plus, of course, Article 3 of Interpol's constitution forbids the use of Interpol's tools for any reasons that are political, military, racial, or religious. So that's an important point I would like to make, and how I'm probably a little restricted in what I can say here. But what I will say is that regardless of what war capability you develop in the cyber sphere, it will be using the same tools that the cyber criminals are using today, motivated by greed and by money, as is the motivation of a lot of criminals today. And I would argue that any cyber war capability that's put in place must also address the fact that capability in the cybercrime sphere is very low in a lot of countries, in the vast majority of countries, is very low. The cybercrime units are under-resourced, they're all backlogged. The understanding of this crime type is very complex, is a very complex issue for law enforcement. Access to long-haired geeks like Mr. Kaspersky has is not as easy for law enforcement, and so, the capability, the operation capacity, my biggest fear is that all of this talk and if cybersecurity, of course countries need to have cyber security defenses in place where another country, an enemy, might try and take them out on that level. But the danger is that cyber warfare, cyber weapons become fashionable, in inverted commas, if you'll just allow me to do this just once, I'll only do it once. It will become fashionable, and as a result will take away much needed resources, will take away concentration from what is the fundamental issue here, which is security online, which is the basic problem that the internet is fundamentally insecure, that it was built as a trust network, and on top of that we're trying to patch security. And that'll never work, because if your foundations are flawed, well then whatever you build on those foundations is also flawed. And we see this now with DNSSEC and trying to get that rolled out and trying to get people to be involved in it. It's a patch. It's a patch on what fundamentally was a trust network that just went out of control. And perhaps that's where we need to be looking, more than we need to be looking at maybe a new internet, dare I say it. So that's my bottom line. Countries tend not to, countries and humans tend not to react until after the fact. This sort of discussion is healthy because it allows countries to arm themselves beforehand, fine. But we saw in Estonia, they went and bought the hose after they had the fire. Because at this moment in time, Estonia is a small country, albeit, but they are a world leader in how they amalgamated their CERT, their national CERT, and their law enforcement, and everybody else, to ensure that they didn't suffer from what they suffered in 2007. So again, classic example.
We're going to come back to that because that addresses the theme of what should we do and how we can get international cooperation. First, Eugene, do you have a reaction to Dr. Seger's, recommendation that we think of it in terms of attacks, which is certainly, a technologist's approach too.
Exactly. First of all, I'm really happy that the things which I was talking about for years now are becoming more some practical results. At least we have all these gentlemen here on the panel. Thank you again. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm really happy that some ideas now they have some practical steps. At least we're talking about this, and there are new organizations in the United Nations, in Europe, in Interpol, to address all these issues. And I agree that one of the most important things is that's definition. What's that? And I think that the best way the best way to define cyber threats is to understand the sources, motivation, and damage. If damage is financial, and if there are some people are behind the attacks which just they have their financial motivation, that's cybercrime. If there is a serious damage on a national or regional economy or infrastructure, and there is a states behind that, that's war. Have to understand who is behind this attack. Who was? You have the industrial system, which is destroyed or damaged. Who was behind of that? cybercriminals and you're waiting for blackmail? Was it unhappy employee? Hacktivists, which it made it by mistake? They didn't know. Or there was a state behind that. I think that definition is the serious damage on national or regional infrastructure or any serious damage which is not possible to investigate with help of Interpol. If hacktivists or cybercriminals are behind of that, it's possible to investigate because governments have to cooperate. If some government doesn't cooperate, it means maybe this government is behind the attack. So it's my idea about definition of cyber war and cyber weapon. Serious damage which is not possible to investigate with the help of cyber police forces. So in this case, Estonia attack is definitely not the war. It's not weapon, because as far as we know, this attack was managed by Russian spammers. So this is case of hacktivists. Well, the result is a serious damage to their national infrastructure, IT infrastructure. But there was no state behind that. Maybe there was a little bit of Russian state but Russian government is so bureaucratic and so slow, so don't expect it will react so quick, because when the Russian this military monument was removed in Estonia, the attacks happened next day or in a couple of days. So that was definitely not Russian government. There was some more faster, more reactive forces there. As far as we know, that was the Russian spammers. Another example, do you remember there was an incident between two military planes somewhere in the Taiwan region? There was a Chinese and American planes in 2001, and just after that, there were some negative comments from both sides, and immediately Chinese hackers started to attack American infrastructure, and American hackers started to strike back. This is not the case of the war as well, because there were no states behind that. There were hacktivists. Their result could be very, very damaged. It will be like a cyber terrorism, or like Estonia, or any other type of this level of damage. But if there are just people behind that, hacktivists behind that, I think it's not a case of war. If something bad happens and you can't trace the source, but the source is lost somewhere in some country, maybe this is the case of the cyber war.
Very good. Well, I think we've demonstrated that there's no consensus building up around the definitions of cyber war. And therefore, how do we either get to consensus or move beyond definitions and start ensuring that there is international cooperation, because that's the only thing we're going to be able to bring to bear on the issue and all.
Well, you know, international bureaucrats like me, we are the most pragmatic people on earth.
I'm not so sure about that.
So, in order to be pragmatic, we have to realize that it takes forever, a very long time to develop international treaties, even though international treaties are very important. But it takes a very long, long time. So we have to do two things. We have to separate the issues into more manageable portions. I don't think it is possible at the international level to have a treaty which covers cyber war, cyber terrorism, cyber crime altogether. It's different issues here, two different issues. It cannot be covered in a single treaty anyway. So we have to look at what is already there. Among other things, we have on the cyber crime area, the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. It exists. It may not be accepted by the 200 or so member states of the United Nations, but it's already implemented by a big share of the world community. So this is something that already exists. And to come back to a point, just as a sort of a footnote okay, Estonia was hacktivists, maybe not cyber war, and so on. It's very difficult to find out. And by the time you found out, the country may be gone, the country under attack, right? So to try to respond to something as a cybercrime, because that's clear, you know, a denial of service attack is a cybercrime in most countries of the world. To start looking at something as cybercrime and call for international cooperation, because already the refusal to cooperate by another country is already an indication that maybe there's more behind than just hacktivists. So to start investigating something as cybercrime, call for international cooperation on cybercrime as a starting point can help a lot. You can go a long way with that before you have to resort to military action of any sort. And this can also help de-escalate a conflict. This is a very precarious area because it indeed touches on the vital interests of states. In order to de-escalate, you could also say, let's look at it as a crime and not as an aggression by a foreign state. You can also go a long way. We discussed yesterday a bit the Lockerbie situation when the Pan Am flight was brought down over Lockerbie in Scotland. And at the end of the day, that was then dealt with as a criminal trial, where 2 terrorists or suspected terrorists from Libya were then on trial and were sentenced to prison. So that also helped de-escalate the situation, if you can follow a criminal justice avenue. So cybercrime strategies, making use of what exists already, is an important element. And also what Mick said, we have to invest resources into cybercrime prevention and criminal justice to establish the capabilities of countries to investigate and prosecute and to cooperate with each other, and maybe get some of the billions that you mentioned.
They are not with us.
Let's take all those billions in the military area and divide it between Interpol, the ITU, and the Council of Europe, and then the world will be safe, I think.
Alex, do you have
I
any?
agree, it's a good idea.
All right. So passed. Alex, do you have any contribution to how you would spend that money if it were available for international cooperation?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, where do I start? We might not need to have an agreed definition first for us to agree that there is an issue. You see, when we talk about treaties are things which they could take some time, but it depends also on how you start building them. You see, we are a treaty organization. I work for a treaty organization. And at the end of this year, we are going to review one of our most significant treaties. This is because we have all the countries on board being treated at the same level. And it is their treaty. It is not something that somebody else builds and tries to sell to them. That's the difference. So every 4 years, we review some of our treaty instruments. The Constitution and Convention are reviewed every 4 years. When we came up with the ITRs, this treaty was adopted within a period of 1 year by 178 countries. That is because these countries were part of the process of building it. So I would not sit here and tell you how difficult or easy it is to do a treaty. It depends on what kind of organization you are talking about and how the organization treats all the countries, the 193 countries in our case, and if they are all on the same level. But going back to international cooperation, I think there are things that we need to be able to do today. We don't need to wait for a treaty to be established. This could take some time. I agree with Alex here. There are areas where we have been working on. We have probably one of the few organizations in the world who can say that we have 140 countries formally committed to working together in the area of cybersecurity. This is the ITU Impact project. For those who would want additional information, that's also available. But we believe that cooperation could start at the level of the technicians. You see, when you bring the experts together, they can be IT people, they could be enforcement officials. When you already create a framework for collaboration, these people will start communicating. When there's an incident, they'll be able to either pick up their phone or their email and send an email to somebody that they know and to de-escalate the situation. So we believe that we need to build on those existing infrastructure, the existing frameworks, and eventually add the layers which are necessary to either formalize this. We are also, when I say we, I'm talking ITO Impact. We are working with a number of partners, both from government and from industry also, because you need a wide range of skills to be able to address the broad range of issues that we are talking about, be it cybersecurity or cyber warfare or cybercrime or just cyber threats in general. So I think international cooperation is really important, and I think that we have to look at this as something where it is more like a level playing field, in the sense that it is no longer, we should not have this notion of these are countries with a certain level of development and these are countries with a certain level of development. I am from Cameroon, you would say it's a least developing country, but I studied computer science in the States, like everybody else who studies in a good school. And you acquire the same knowledge, and once you have your computer, you can develop products which would be the same as somebody who came from a country which is industrialized. What I'm trying to say here is we have to treat this issue of international cooperation in a slightly different way from the way we would treat traditional issues. Because there is not that gap. That gap doesn't exist anymore. We are talking here about software engineering. We are talking about people who write code. And we talked briefly about the 2 Filipino kids who did the I Love You virus many years back. So we need to look at that as a new way of cooperating, where it is treating countries on an equal level and not, I don't know how to put this, but we just need to be sure that we don't have a solution that we are putting on the table and telling people, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to have as a solution. But let us have an open and fair dialogue and take on board the concerns of different countries. That is how we are going to get through international cooperation in an area where the gaps are so few, not in terms of infrastructure, but in terms of knowledge. Mm-hmm. My SecGen always says, instead of today we have 6.5 billion superpowers, or 7 billion superpowers. It says because it's all about brain power. And that is how malware is written. It's about smart people writing code.